President, I know there's a lot going on today. The spending bill, the budget, all very critical to our country. Certainly a lot of focus on that. A lot of people are spending a lot of time, myself included, digging into that agreement. But the news yesterday on Iran also deserves our attention. Reuters reported that Iran, according to the UN Security Council panel of experts, violated UN Security Council Resolution 1929 when it tested a ballistic missile capable of delivering a nuclear warhead in October. So they just said a violation of a UN Security Council resolution. And they're looking at, and it's probably likely, but you see here, the Iranians also launched another ballistic missile in November. And that's also another likely violation of a UN Security Council resolution. I made some remarks on the floor a few days ago about Iran, Mr. President, and about the nuclear deal. And I reminded my colleagues that one of the selling points by the President, by Secretary Kerry, about this deal was that they were making the case it was likely to improve Iran's behavior, bring them into the community of nations, get them to behave more like a normal country, not the world's largest sponsor of terrorism, which it currently is. But since the signing of the deal, the nuclear deal, which we debated here on this floor, Iran's behavior has only gotten worse. Examples are very numerous. Leaders of the country continue to hold rallies chanting death to America, death to Israel. Iran continues to fund Hezbollah, one of its terrorist proxies around the world, hundreds of millions of dollars. It violated UN Security Council resolutions that prevents the Quds Force commander, General Sullivan, from traveling. He actually traveled to Russia to meet with Mr. Putin to talk about arms trade, in likely a violation of another Security Council resolution. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff recently said that up to 2,000 Iranian troops are in Syria helping to keep the Assad regime in power, working with the Russians on that. And Mr. President, something that we can never forget, probably the worst outrage that we've seen all since the signing of the nuclear agreement a couple months ago, is that in a direct affront to the United States and our citizens, Iran is still holding 5 Americans against their will. Took another American hostage since the signing of this agreement. One of them is a Marine. One of them is a pastor. One of them is a Washington Post reporter. All fellow American citizens. Mr. President, as we prepare for the holidays, when families come together, when friends come together, the President and Secretary Kerry should be working day and night on the phone, every instrument of American power to try and release these Americans. But that certainly doesn't seem to be happening. So all of this has taken place since the signing of the agreement. All of this is proof enough, I believe, that the Iran nuclear deal certainly didn't change Iran's behavior for the better. To the contrary, it's becoming increasingly clear that the Obama administration's deal with Iran has only emboldened Iran to take more provocative actions against the United States, our citizens, and our allies. Mr. President, Iran's leaders are testing us. It is clear that they are testing us right now. How we respond to these tests is critical. As noted, Iran's missile launches on October 11th clearly violated UN Security Council Resolution 1929. And the one on November 21st likely did as well. But what does this mean? We haven't discussed, what does this mean for the current Iran nuclear deal that was recently signed? What are the implications on moving forward with that deal? What are the implications of this activity on moving forward with that deal? Mr. President, I believe a strong argument can be made that these actions by Iran mean that they are already violating the spirit and the intent of the nuclear agreement that this body just voted on a few months ago. Already. Former Secretary of State and former U.S. Senator Hillary Clinton actually predicted this just last week when she stated, quote, "They are going to violate it. They are going to violate the nuclear agreement. And when they do, we need to respond quickly and very harshly." That's the former Secretary of State, former member of this body. Well, I think Secretary Clinton's right on this. And President Obama himself indicated that there is definitely a tie between the Iranian nuclear deal from his administration and Iran's use of ballistic missile activities. As a matter of fact, the president, in a press conference, clearly stated that these activities, the prohibitions on these activities, were part of the nuclear agreement. When in July of this year, after the signing of the agreement, President Obama stated, "What I said to our negotiators was, let's press for a longer extension of the arms embargo and the ballistic missile prohibitions. We got that. We got 5 years in which under this new agreement, the nuclear agreement, arms coming in and out of Iran are prohibited, and we got 8 years for the respective ballistic missiles." This is the president talking about his nuclear agreement. To look at another tie between ballistic missiles and the nuclear agreement, you need to look at the UN Security Council that implemented the Iran nuclear deal. That's UN Security Council 2231. That's replacing some of the other UN Security Councils, and it's the legal framework for the nuclear deal that this body debated and approved. Here's what UN Security Council Resolution 2231 states. Iran is called upon not to undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons until the date 8 years after the JCPOA adoption day. So again, plain English of the connection. The UN Security Council resolution, that's the international framework for the nuclear deal, says no ballistic missile activity by Iran. And yet, Mr. President, now we know in no uncertain terms, because our UN ambassador, Ambassador Power, just stated it, that this launch in October was just what that UN Security Council resolution said Iran couldn't do. She said that that launch was inherently capable of delivering a nuclear weapon. So that's a lot of UN Security Council resolutions. That's a lot of activity. Where does that leave us? Where does that leave us with regard to the Iran nuclear deal? Well, it's obviously clear that Iran just violated UN Security Council Resolution 1929. That's already been stated by the panel of experts, by Ambassador Power, and the language of UN Security Council Resolution 2231, the implementing UN resolution of the entire Iran deal. So, Mr. President, this is what I mean when I say that Iran is already violating the spirit and the intent of the Iranian nuclear deal. The deal that this body debated just a couple months ago is already being violated by the Iranians. So what should we do? Well, some of us are already taking action. 35 members of this body yesterday sent a letter to the president, written by my colleague from New Hampshire, Senator Ayotte, and it said basically, Mr. President, given these ballistic missile activities, given that Iran is violating UN Security Council resolutions that relate to the nuclear agreement, you should not be lifting sanctions. The Obama administration is talking about lifting sanctions as part of the nuclear agreement as early as next month. Tens of billions of dollars to the world's largest terrorist regime are going to be lifted to allow them to continue their provocative activities against the United States, our allies, and our citizens. What we are saying, 1/3 of the members of this body, is that we shouldn't be doing that. The President should heed the advice from Senator Ayotte's letter. Additionally, Mr. President, I think there is a strong argument, and people need to look at this issue, that can be made about Iran's recent behavior, is that we cannot lift these sanctions pursuant to the terms of the nuclear deal. The nuclear agreement that was debated in this body states that before sanctions are lifted on implementation day, Iran must be in accord with UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which, among other things, calls upon Iran not to undertake activity related to ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear weapons. So you see how they're related? The nuclear agreement that this body agreed to, the implementation plan of the nuclear agreement, paragraph 34.3, says that Iran has to be in accord with this provision in order for sanctions to be lifted. Well, Iran is not in accord with this provision. The UN has said that. Ambassador Powers said that. So bottom line, Mr. President, if Iran is already violating this UN Security Council resolution, then under paragraph 34.3 of the implementation plan of the nuclear deal by the Obama administration, sanctions shouldn't be lifted. Now here's how the President put it when he was selling the deal. Quote, if Iran violates this deal, the sanctions we imposed that have helped cripple the Iranian economy, the sanctions that helped make this deal possible, would snap back into place promptly. Now, I agree that's what we should be doing. But here's the key point. The President doesn't need to wait for the sanctions to snap back. He can and he should take action now, before it's too late, before billions of dollars flood into Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Again, Mr. President, that's why over 1/3 of the members of this body wrote the President yesterday, and I urge my colleagues, particularly my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who I know are concerned about these issues, because I've had discussions with a number of them, they should be writing the President as well. They should be telling the President the same thing. Mr. President, Iran is violating the agreement. Don't lift the sanctions. He can and he should act now. The President should not lift sanctions against Iran. He needs to go back and reread his own nuclear agreement. And he needs to heed the advice of his former Secretary of State to, quote, act quickly and harshly against Iran, unquote, when it violates the agreement by not allowing them access to tens of billions of dollars. The President needs to do that now. Mr. President, I yield the floor.